Some truths aren't spoken. They're buried, whispered only in the cracks between prayers, in the silence that follows applause, in the stillness just before the lights go on. When John Wick, the headlines had just begun to fade. Pope Francis dies at 91. But John wasn't there to promote a film. He wasn't there for laughs. He was there because something sacred had been entrusted to him. In front of millions of viewers, in a studio meant for stories and stunts, John Wick did something no one expected. He broke his silence, and what he revealed wasn't a confession. It was a warning. The studio lights flickered once, then held steady, casting a pale glow over the hushed audience. They had come expecting a quiet evening, a few anecdotes, maybe a strange metaphor or two from a man known less for words and more for the myth carved in his silence. John Wick stepped onto the stage. Not the suited specter from old news footage, not the name whispered with awe or fear. This John Wick was different. 58, lined face, dark eyes that didn't just look ahead, but seemed to look through. His black suit was simple, understated. No tie, hair pulled back, a few strands of silver catching the light like threads of old memory. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if each step carried the weight of something he hadn't yet decided to speak aloud. The crowd, trained by 100 interviews and 1,000 sound bites, waited for the banter, the late-night warmth, the easy smile. But John didn't smile. The host, a polished man with a practiced grin and cue cards tucked discreetly at his side, welcomed him with an open hand and a charm honed over seasons. John shook it gently, then sat. The two faced each other, as expected. Between them, a glass of water. A few question cards, and one unexpected thing. A small golden rosary resting on a velvet blue cushion. No explanation, no comment. Just there. The host leaned in, breaking the moment with trained ease. "John, you're not exactly the guy people expect to see right after a papal funeral," he quipped, "but you still look immortal. What's your secret? Holy water?" Laughter scattered through the audience. John didn't laugh. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at the host. Instead, he looked at the rosary. And he stayed looking. It wasn't a glance. It was a silence, one that settled over the studio with the weight of a cathedral door swinging shut. The laughter died down, naturally, like light fading in a storm. The host chuckled again, this time less sure. "Everything all right? You're even more zen than usual tonight." Still, John said nothing. But something was happening. You could feel it. There's a kind of stillness that doesn't ask permission. It enters a room and claims it. And tonight, John Wick wasn't here for promotion. He was here for something else. He reached forward, one finger brushing the edge of the rosary. Then he looked up. His voice, when it came, was low, even, as if the words had been sitting in his chest for years, waiting for a moment quiet enough to live. "He told me something that night in Rome." The host blinked. "Who?" "The Pope." No laughter, no applause, just the soft sound of every person in the room holding their breath. And the feeling that the story everyone thought they were here to watch had just been replaced by something none of them were ready for. The host hesitated. His usual rhythm, joke, laugh, segue, had hit something immovable. His voice, when it returned, was thinner. "Wait, what do you mean the Pope?" John didn't answer right away. His gaze hadn't shifted from the rosary. The camera zoomed in slightly, an instinctive decision from the control room. The beads shimmered faintly under the studio lights, but John's fingers didn't lift them. He didn't fidget. He just stared at them, as if they were whispering something only he could hear. Finally, he spoke again. "He gave me this." A ripple moved through the audience, soft murmurs, furtive glances. The host leaned forward, half intrigued, half trying to recover control of the room. "You mean Pope Francis gave you that rosary?" John nodded, slowly. "And an envelope, sealed. I kept it for years. I didn't open it. Not until today." The air tightened. "You opened it today?" the host asked, eyebrows raised. "Why today?" John looked up. His eyes weren't filled with drama. There was no performance in them. Just quiet gravity. Because he's gone. And because silence can only hold so much before it becomes a weight too heavy to carry. The host exhaled, almost inaudibly. Around the room, the audience had forgotten their phones, their snacks, the fact that they were at a live taping. The atmosphere was no longer scripted entertainment. It was a reckoning. "What was in the envelope?" the host finally asked. John didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back, resting one hand on the velvet beside the rosary. Then, in a voice that carried something ancient, something shaken loose from deep within, he said, "You'll understand when you know how it started." 3 John's voice softened, as if he were telling the story to himself more than the room. "I was in Florence. I hadn't been seen publicly in months. I was trying to disappear again." He paused, letting the understatement linger. "It was late. I was at a hotel no one knew I was staying in. Then there was a knock at the door." The host leaned forward, instinctively caught in the unfolding tale. "And?" "A man handed me an envelope. No name, no words, just the Vatican seal. Real wax. Red. Heavy. The studio lights dimmed subtly, the air eerily reverent. Inside was a handwritten note. It said, 'I would like to walk with you in silence among the olive trees.'" That was it. The host blinked. "From Pope Francis?" John nodded. There was no invitation to speak. No press. Just that one sentence. "And you went?" A small pause. Then a soft, unexpected smile from John, one not of amusement, but of remembrance. "Yes, I went." And that single quiet word, "yes," somehow said more than 100 would have. "They didn't take me through the front gates." John's voice was even, almost liturgical. "A car picked me up. Modest, no guards, no ceremony. We entered through a side corridor, past sleeping rooms and forgotten stairwells. Eventually we came to a garden." He paused, and there he was. The host's hands were still now, resting on the table, palms down. He looked tired, but not defeated. There was a clarity in his eyes. Not the kind you get from power. The kind you get from being alone with the truth for too long. John's eyes drifted slightly as he relived it. "He didn't offer me a chair. We stood. Just the 2 of us under an olive tree. And he said, without introduction, 'I saw what you did.'" The host furrowed his brow. "What did you do?" John met his gaze. "I visited a children's hospital, unannounced, no press. I just brought books, sat with them, read to them." The audience remained silent, breathlessly attentive. He said that act, done in silence, meant more to him than any sermon he'd ever heard. John paused. Something flickered in his expression. Grief, maybe, or the weight of carrying someone else's burden. Then, he told me, he hadn't heard God's voice in years. Gasps, small, unintentional, moved through the room. He said, "I pray, I kneel, but the heavens have been mute." The host sat still. John's voice grew quieter. He looked at me and said, "If I don't see you again, there's something you need to keep alive." Then he gave me the envelope. Back in the studio, silence clung to the air like incense in a cathedral. John reached slowly into the inner pocket of his jacket. The audience barely dared to breathe. His fingers emerged with a weathered envelope, yellowed by time, its wax seal still intact, a deep crimson stamped with the papal crest. The host swallowed. "You brought it here?" John nodded. "I've carried it with me for years, every hotel room, every film set. I told myself it wasn't my place to open it, but when I heard he had died..." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he held the envelope up to the camera, not dramatically, but with quiet gravity, as one might raise a chalice. Then he broke the seal. The sound was soft, barely audible, but to those in the studio, it felt deafening. He unfolded the parchment with steady hands. His voice, when it returned, was nearly a whisper, but somehow it filled the room. To the man of silence who listens more than he speaks, this world does not need more saints in gold. It needs men who will carry light through shadows cast by those who were supposed to protect it. The host stared, unmoving. John's fingers trembled, not from fear, but from reverence, as he continued reading. "I write this with a heart torn between duty and despair. I wore the fisherman's crown while swimming in a sea of secrets." He stopped, closed his eyes for a beat. "There are forces in this church I could never cleanse. They wear crosses, but move like wolves." A hush fell across the audience. The letter continued, If my voice is silenced, I ask you, not to destroy, but to carry the truth, quietly, steadily, as you've always done. Then John lowered the first page and unfolded a second sheet. The second page was thinner, older. John's voice dropped. It is a vision, a prophecy. The host leaned in. The Pope wrote this? John nodded. The one who will undo me shall not come from within. He will smile, he will dress as a friend, but he will carry the void. A collective shiver moved through the room. John looked up. He believed faith wouldn't collapse from heresy, but from imitation, from someone who seems pure, but hollows everything from within. The host opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. John set the letter down. After that night, I returned home. I said nothing. I told no one, not even those closest to me. Then the letters started. The host blinked. Letters? John nodded again. No return address, no signature, just warnings. Each one different, but all with the same message. Do not open the envelope. Stay silent. You are being watched. He reached beside him and lifted a folder. Inside, aged papers, clippings, scribbled notes. 7 letters over 4 years, each from a different place, each in a different hand. At first, I thought it was paranoia, but then the patterns began to surface. The second page was thinner, older. John's voice dropped. It is a vision, a prophecy. The host leaned in. The Pope wrote this? John nodded. The one who will undo me shall not come from within. He will smile. He will dress as a friend, but he will carry the void. A collective shiver moved through the room. John looked up. He believed faith wouldn't collapse from heresy, but from imitation, from someone who seems pure, but hollows everything from within. The host opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. John set the letter down. After that night, I returned home. I said nothing. I told no one, not even those closest to me. Then the letters started. The host blinked. Letters? John nodded again. No return address, no signature, just warnings. Each one different, but all with the same message. Do not open the envelope. Stay silent. You are being watched. He reached beside him and lifted a folder. Inside, aged papers, clippings, scribbled notes. 7 letters over 4 years, each from a different place, each in a different hand. At first, I thought it was paranoia, but then the patterns began to surface. John set the letters aside and grew still. Then came the dream. The lights dimmed slightly. A subconscious hush swept over the crowd. It was the night I opened the envelope. I wasn't asleep, not really, but I was elsewhere. I was standing in a vast abandoned basilica, covered in dust, no candles, no prayers, just silence. He paused. At the altar, he was there. Pope Francis, but not sick, not tired. He looked luminous. The host whispered, "What did he say?" John's voice grew softer. "You thought you were only a man of war," he said, "but I saw the one who carried silence with dignity." Then he said, "The church is drowning in its own echo, and only someone who understands silence will hear the voice of God again." John reached into the folder again and pulled out a photograph. He held it delicately between 2 fingers. This arrived a year later. No note, no return address. He turned it toward the host, but not the cameras. "It's from the garden, the night we walked together. I didn't know it had been taken." The host leaned in. "What's that? There, in the background?" "That's what I want to know," John said. In the background of the photo, a figure, hooded, watching from beneath the trees. I've seen him before, in 3 other photos sent to me over the years. Different cities, different moments, always distant, always hidden. The host sat back, stunned. "Who is it?" John shook his head. "I don't know." Then he added, "But in the dream," the Pope said, "you'll see the shadow before you see the light." The studio was still. The cameras rolled in silence. John's voice turned quieter, but sharper. In the final lines of his letter, the Pope wrote, "Faith must evolve, or it will be hollowed out by those who wear its face but have no soul." He looked around the room, his gaze steady. "He told me the next great step of faith might not come from the church at all." The host blinked hard, uncomfortable. "That's a big idea." "It terrified him," John replied, "but he saw it coming." The silence wasn't just reverent now, it was haunted. "The enemy won't come dressed in rage," John added. "He'll come dressed in reverence. He won't burn the church down, he'll empty it. The host finally found his voice. Why say all this now? John looked directly into the camera. Because truth is quieter than lies, and because silence, if kept too long, becomes complicity. He paused. There's something else. He reached into the folder one final time and pulled out something small, square, covered in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly. Another photo. This one came just 3 weeks ago. It's from a city I haven't visited in 10 years, and yet I'm in it, and so is he. He placed the photo face up on the table, but angled so only the host could see. The host leaned forward, his breath caught. That's that figure again. John nodded. And I think he's waiting. He stood quietly. Faith isn't gone, it's waiting. And silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's the beginning of war. He turned toward the curtain, then stopped, looked over his shoulder. And if you think this ends here, a pause. Wait, because what came after this was worse.